Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Vince, and I've been doing admissions since 1989 and college counseling since 1998 in California.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at the Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. Good afternoon, friends. I'm going to talk to you today about 4 of the really hot topics in higher ed. And we'll be talking about some different hot topics over the next several weeks. You know, we've been doing what looks like a 7 to 8 part series on athletic recruitment on our Thursday episodes in our In the News slot with Andy Strickler. And I say looks like 7 to 8 because we're still not completely done the series yet. And so we've recorded 6 of the episodes so far. By next week, I'll know for sure. Is it 7 or is it 8? But there's still a lot of news going on in admissions. And so that's what I'm going to try to do a little bit of a switcheroo. You know, normally Thursdays we do This Week in the News and kind of let you know about hot topics. So I'll be doing some of that here on our Monday episode so we can run that athletic interview on our Thursday's episode. And at least one of the weeks, I'm going to do a real deep dive on the ACT rollout, which is not going as smoothly as people may think if you don't know some of the things going on under the surface. So I'm going to do a deep dive into some of the problems with the ACT attempting to switch really hastily to a more digital test. So we'll spend a whole week on that. And then I'll be in California. I'll be at the NACAC conference, our National Admission Conference, where I don't know how many, but 6, 7, 8, 9, maybe even close to 10,000 college counselors, admission professionals will be gathering in the LA Coliseum in late September. News is always made at NACAC, so I'll certainly be coming back and sharing with you a lot of the buzz and what was going on at NACAC and trends and all of that. So that's some of the stuff that I'm going to be covering with you guys over the next few weeks. And of course, we'll have our traditional interview that we have on every Monday episode. And for us right now, that's part 2 of 5, Sarah Lovely's interview looking at admissions and the arts with Vince. But before I dive into our content for today, there are a few announcements I want to share. So I'm doing 2 interviews this week. Aaron Wolf, Director of Financial Aid at Bucknell, and we're talking about why if a student gets 6 8 awards, why are they all over the place? And there's like no consistency. And so if you have any questions you'd like me to ask Aaron, you have literally until Tuesday. So if you're hearing this on Wednesday, sorry, but that's the last day. If you have any question that you would like to ask, you can send that in. Then on Friday, I'm interviewing David Graves. Dave's the Director of Undergraduate Admissions at the University of Georgia. We'll be doing a deep dive on UGA. If you have any questions you want me to ask, Dave, you have until Thursday afternoon to send those my way so I can incorporate them into that interview. I prefer SpeakPipe, right? Speakpipe.com/YCBK, but I will take email for those. I know it's confusing. Question for listener now, exclusively SpeakPipe, but if you have a question that you'd like me to ask in an interview, I can do that, SpeakPipe or email, your preference. I'm 13 days from being in California for 3.5 weeks. I've started my California puzzle, and I'll be at our national conference. And so I'll be meeting students and parents and families, touring colleges, doing Zoom and phone calls. And, I'm going to be in San Diego all the way to Sacramento while I'm on the road. I'd love to meet you if you're anywhere close to any of the places. So we've got 2 events in San Diego on the 11th and 12th, one in Redwood City on the 19th, one in Santa Monica on the 22nd. And on the one in Santa Monica, Susan will be there, Vince will be there, and we're hoping to have a Colorado College admission officer there. So just go to yourcollegeboundkid.com, click the events page, and go ahead and sign up. We'd love to see you. And it's only because of the generosity of our community. It really is a community. It really is a family. I mean, all four of these events occurred because listeners said, hey, I'd love to host. Hey, I'd love to host. Hey, I'd love to host. That's how all four of them happened, really organically. I know, I'm just forever grateful. Now, friends, I never told you this before, but my first professional job I ever had was in Daly City. You're like, where is Daly City? Well, it's 9.6 miles from San Francisco. And I used to just go out like right on the ocean. I couldn't afford my own place. I was living in a house and just staying there. And I was right on the ocean. And I would just go out in the ocean for hours and just pray for like hours. And I look forward to getting back to Daly City, back in the mountains. That was 1989, 35 years ago. Boy, life flies by. Now, a few weeks ago, I mentioned on the podcast that if you want to hear a segment I did for our podcast partners, our supporters, our donors, on how to use LinkedIn to see where graduates from any specific school, how they fare in the job world, just email me. I did it several years ago, and I'd be happy to send it to you. And you have been emailing me and asking for that. But what I forgot was I also did it on episode 125. So if you're interested in that, you can just go to episode 125. I think it's easier to do it on our website. That's my opinion. But whatever way suits you, if you're a Spotify person or you use Apple or whatever, just pull up episode 125. Now, that's not interview 125. I have our interviews numbers and our episodes numbered. And it starts around the 59-minute mark. It's about a 15-minute segment. So I'd encourage you to look it up for any school that your student is considering attending and to see where graduates actually end up. All right, let's dive into our content for the day. So I'm going to cover 4 areas today that are in the news. And the first is legacy admissions. So legacy admissions, of course, has to do with, is there any preferential treatment at all for you as a student because you have a parent that graduated from the school you're applying to? Well, the zeitgeist out there in the country is a blowback against legacy admissions. Now, this was so obvious that you could see this coming because when you look at the 9 states that had banned affirmative action, most of the time they went ahead and banned legacy admissions. Kind of the argument was, well, how can you justify giving preference to somebody just because their parent went to a place and then you're not looking at people who have been historically excluded in certain instances and not factoring that in. So Illinois has become the 4th state to do a legacy ban. Just signed into law recently by Governor J.B. Pritzker. And the Illinois ban, in some ways, was ceremonial because it's banning preferences at public colleges. And actually, there were no public colleges in Illinois that were already using legacy admissions. But now they can. It's like they're prohibited from doing it. And Illinois has become the 4th state to ban legacy preferences. Now, Colorado was the 1st state to ban legacy preferences. And Virginia also followed and banned legacy preferences at public universities. Maryland passed a bill making it illegal at all colleges, so public or private. That's the one people are really watching because legacy tends to carry the most weight at private schools. So will others follow suit like Maryland and do it at public and private schools? There are conversations that are happening. I've mentioned to you before some of the buzz going on, particularly in Massachusetts, but it's not only Massachusetts. There are proposals right now to ban legacy preferences that are up for consideration in New York, Massachusetts, California, and Minnesota. Now, if you heard my interview with Rick Clark, probably, 9 months or so ago, he's like, who's kidding who? Like, if you've got an alumni that's going to donate $25 million to build the new student center, of course you're going to take that into consideration. Like, you're not stupid. You have to advance your institution. So just because some states are formally banning legacy admissions, that does not mean they can't factor into consideration someone who could advance your institution in some other significant ways, whether it be legacy or development and admit. So it's not as clear cut as it sounds, right? All right, let's talk about some other big news that came out this week. A number of you reached out to me about it. It has to do with how the ban on affirmative action, is it impacting the racial composition of the student body? Well, the answer is we don't know. But there was a big splash this week when MIT was the first school to really come forward and share their data on this. And at MIT, there's a pretty significant change in the racial composition of their incoming class before the affirmative action ban versus after. So let's just look at the data. Well, first of all, before I do that, remember the Supreme Court ruling happened in June of 2023. So MIT identifies, 4 groups of students of color who are underrepresented on their campuses. Okay, and they include Black students, Native American, Pacific Islander, and then an ethnic category, Hispanic. All right, so 25% of the 2023 class had been Black, Hispanic, Native American, or Pacific Islander. In this class, it went down to 16%. So that's a significant reduction, like of almost 40% reduction, 25% down to 16%. So what happened to everybody else? Well, 1% reduction with white students. They went from 38% to 37%. Where were the gains? Asian American students now are almost 1 out of every 2 students at MIT in the incoming class. So Asian American students went from 40% to 47%. And Stu Schmill, who runs that office, he came right out and just was explicit. And he said, the decline in diversity is directly related to the Supreme Court decision. Well, here's a quote from him, actually. We expected this would result in fewer students from historically underrepresented racial and ethnic groups enrolling at MIT, Schmill said. This is a question and answer that MIT actually published. And then he said this, that's what has happened. Now, here's another question. MIT also was one of the first schools to come out and to restore mandatory testing. So it does get a little bit more complicated. Was it your mandatory testing policy or was it affirmative action policy? Stu Schmill's putting it 100% on affirmative action. I'll tell you my thoughts. I don't think you're going to see this type of racial disparity and drop off when other highly selective schools eventually release their data, ones who didn't necessarily change the testing policy. So we'll see. That's just a prediction on my behalf. We'll see when the data's out. But interesting article that's creating quite a bit of brouhaha out there in the college admissions world. All right, next I want to talk to you a little bit about the FAFSA changes. And there's a new study out, and it's called How America Pays for College. And so it's looking at what changes occurred before last year to this year. A lot like the MIT did, right? Look at the year before, look at the current year, and compare and see what's going on. So what this study has found is that more Americans are borrowing money to pay for college. So almost half the families in America, according to this study, borrowed money for college, 49%. Now, the year before, that number was 41%. So how are they coming up with this money? Well, 23% of families are using loans, and that's up from 19% the previous year. And here's the bad part. 40% of families said they had discussed who would pay back the loans. That is dastardly. That is preposterous. That is negligent. I mean, if you're going to take out loans, you got to know what the payback plan is. Here's something else from that study. Over 43% said they considered more expensive colleges and universities because loans were available. So option of loans made them consider more expensive schools. And almost half the students said they believed their federal loans would be forgiven. That's very dangerous. So, there's no that loan. I'm going to talk to you more about in upcoming weeks about what's going on with the SAFE plan. I was going to do that a while ago, but things keep changing so much. I'm waiting for something to settle in. And to be honest with you, it might be after the election that we know what's going to happen with the SAFE plan. But I'm monitoring it closely. But I don't want to just do an episode and then it's date it the next week. It's been like watching a ping pong match trying to follow that thing. So the report gives a detailed depiction of the challenges that families faced with the delay because of the glitch rollout in the FAFSA rollout. The study said that 29% of families said the FAFSA was easier to complete, but 44% said they felt more stress over the delayed financial aid decisions, almost 1 in 2. 21% said that they looked into other aid options. 14% said they're considering transferring to lower their cost, and 10% had already transferred. 11% said they were considering leaving college altogether or taking a pause, and 9% had already done so. So you can really see the impact the money is having on college persistence in this study. It's really sad. And the study also looked at AI to see, hey, did families use AI when it came to researching financial aid and scholarships? And 25% of the students and 18% of their parents said they used AI at some point in either their college application or their college decision-making process. That's a really high number when, 18 months ago, AI was not even in our vocabulary. I mean, it was, but it wasn't so prevalent like it is now, right? Especially in a college context. All right, another interesting trend worth watching is what's going on with the College Board and the AP exam. So I was talking to a student of mine recently, and she got a 5 on AP Pre-Calc, and I was congratulating her. And she said, everybody gets a 5 on AP Pre-Calc. That test has so much grade inflation. All my friends got 5s. It started to make me think, what's going on with grading and the AP exam? I didn't know that to be statistically true. I still don't, to be honest, but the student was so convinced about it. So I did come across an interesting discussion about the College Board changing its grading policy. So for those of you who like admissions vernaculars, here's one for you. EBSS. EBSS, Evidence-Based Standard Setting. The College Board is switching to evidence-based standard setting. They're revamping the way they grade APs. Now, this is something that's really been going on since 2022. It's been flying under the radar a bit when they completely overhauled their scoring methodology for most of their exams. It's a shift. And remember, there's more than 3 million of these assessments each year. So if we go back prior to 2022, basically AP exams in each subject were scored according to standards that were set every 5 to 10 years by a panel of experts. And they're like 10 to 18 educators. And these 10 to 18 educators, 2/3 of them were college professors and 1/3 of them were high school teachers. And they used a totally different method of score evaluation. They used their own individual expertise, and they tried to estimate the percentage of AP students who would score each AP score based on their expertise. Now, the new method, this evidence-based standard setting, what it does is it analyzes large swaths of data. I mean, inputs from hundreds of faculty members who review the exams and recommend different score distributions based on student performances and how it compares to comparable college classes. And so there's been a big debate, and I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but you've got, on one side, you've got Trevor Packer, who's over the whole AP program and the revamping. And he's been, an apologist and an advocate and, emissary of the missionary zeal for this new method. And and he calls it a more scientific and a more data focused methodology. And he says EBSS guards against different variations and opinions by a small group of panelists, and it keeps the standards tied to specific skills. And he says it's not going to allow the fluctuation according to college grade inflation. And so he's an advocate of that. This year, they switched the overwhelming majority of the AP tests to use EBSS. Right? In fact, right now, there's only 5 tests that are using the old method. And those 5 that are using the old method, they are set to use this new EBSS in the near future. However, it has its critics. And some of the critics are being very, very outspoken about the test. In fact, there was a big article that came out called "Are AP Exams Getting Easier?" And this created this whole huge debate, if you're in these circles, about if the College Board is not enforcing rigorous scoring policy in an intentional attempt to increase the appeal, in other words, to get more people to take AP courses. It would not be unlike the College Board to do something like that, right? They would get about $100 a pop on these. So I don't know what's going on that, but I certainly wouldn't be surprised if that was part of the motivation. So basically the goal has been to try to bring every exam to the point where between 60 to 80% of students score a 3 or higher. That's what they say is where they would like to land. But they say they would never intentionally position this to, create a recalibration. They say we're using evidence and data, in our perspective. On the other hand, you've got somebody like John Moscatelio, who's very outspoken on the other side of this argument. He's a high school teacher in New Jersey. He founded a company called Macro Learning, and they support school districts building AP and literacy programs. And he called the scoring shift the Great Recalibration. He wrote a very, very critical blog post, and it blew up all over TikTok and everything, and Facebook groups and all these admissions blogs. And he said that now that he's heard the official explanation from Packer, he said it's still unclear how the scoring change is a response to objective data. So here's a quote from him. He says, "This doesn't seem to be reasoning your way to a conclusion based on evidence. It seems like rationalizing your way to a foregone conclusion. It may be that this is the correct thing to do and that scores have been misaligned, but I think there are legitimate doubts about this method and why it always seems to produce the same result of raising scores rather than lowering them." So that's the rebuttal. And then just for a little bit of evidence, and I don't want to go too much into this, and I don't want to bore you guys with like too much detail here, but it is a fact. There are 9 tests, 9 AP exams that have seen significant scores since EBSS has been rolled out. And what are those? AP Lit, A Push, U.S. History, AP Gov, AP World, AP Euro, Macro and Micro, and AP Bio and AP Chem. I mean, the increase in swings is substantial. And I've looked at the data, like some of them, in some years, 44% of people would get a 3 or higher. Now that number is like 77%. So like we're talking about a massive swing, and that's sudden. So it's raising a lot of eyebrows amongst observers across the nation. We had grade inflation, and now we have score inflation. Could it be that the 4 is the new 3? Our college is noticing. Our college is recalibrating. So all questions that I have.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, in part 2 of Vince's interview with Sarah Lovely, Sarah says where she starts her conversations with when it comes to students interested in the arts. Sarah talks about the perception of the starving artist. Sarah talks about how students should reach out to faculty members in the arts. Sarah talks about one way to know what a school values when you're doing your research. Vince has a great idea of how to use Zoom video. Sarah talks about the importance of organization, and she talks about her one school a week plan. Sarah and Vince talk about the importance of course selection in faculty bios. Sarah emphasizes the importance of research. Sarah tells a great story about a fashion student that we all can learn a lot from. And finally, Vince tells a great story about a prolific drawer. Listen and enjoy.
Now, when you went to Walnut Hill, part of the thing that really impressed me when we were first talking is that as a counselor, probably, I don't know, you probably had a range, but I would say maybe a majority of the students more than at other schools, except for other performing arts schools. A large number of those students were looking at performing arts and visual arts programs. As a counselor, because we have two people we have many different types of people in the audience, but the large number of them are counselors, and they come from public high schools, independent schools. Talk about, as a counselor at Walnut Hill, talk about how do you talk about performing in visual arts when you're making sort of a large presentation to a group of students where, maybe 20 or 30 or more are going to be performing in visual arts. Where do you start with families and students?
Yeah. So the first thing that I remind families of is that to really embrace their art. I mean, the world needs artists. Colleges need artists. Colleges can't just accept an entire class full of computer science majors, right? Like artists really, I know I'm an artist, so I'm biased, right? But I just think that the qualities that artists bring to the table within the admission process are, they're not afraid to collaborate. They're not afraid to fail, try again. There's really something about kind of diving deeply into humanity that a lot of artists have to do, telling the storytelling, curiosity. So that's where I kind of start, is to remind students, because I think that the arts get a bad rap sometimes where people are sort of think, well, I'm going to be this idea of a starving artist. And it's like right. Actually, there's so many transferable skills if you're an artist. So that's one of the first things that I remind families is, lean into it. And we can talk, we'll talk later, I think, about how to do that within your applications. But that is definitely one of the first things that I do. I also really encourage families to students, not parents, students or counselors, to really reach out to faculty at the schools that you're looking at. In my experience, faculty, and we can talk about this when we talk about specific art areas, but faculty want to meet artists, and they're usually incredibly generous with their time. And, they'll take time to talk to you, or musicians do trial lessons. So don't be afraid to reach out. And, this is something you're playing as an artist. This is something that you get to do. What a gift that is. I also think that to remember that colleges put their values into what their admission requirements are. And so when students are thinking about what the best fit is for them, look at the requirements for admission. I mean, it's like, Vince, I'm sure like UChicago has some amazing writing supplements, right? When I work with students who are applying to UChicago, I'm sort of saying, like, one of the first things you should do is actually go and read those writing supplements. And if that is something that excites you, great. If it's not the right fit school for you. So, it's the same thing in the arts. If you're really into Shakespeare as a theater major, and this school only wants to see contemporary work, maybe it's not the right fit school for you.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Good.
Yeah. Or like, School of the Arts to Chicago, within their their admission requirements often say with their portfolios, be bold, take a risk, show us what you got. And to me, it's like, that's what they're telling you that they're going to be like when you're there too, right? They want you to not be afraid to take risks with your art. And if that scares you, or if that's a turnoff to you, right, then maybe that's not the right fit school, or maybe it's super exciting to you and that's something that you want. So I really encourage people to do that as well. And then also, this is sort of general advice, but my motto is kind of control the controllables. So
Yes.
There's a lot you can't control in this. You can't control that Carnegie Mellon accepts 0.1% of people who apply, but you can control the quality of the work that you're submitting and how you kind of got your attitude sort of going into that process, and what faculty and teachers and mentors you seek out as you're on this journey. So do it, control that.
Yeah, that's great. That's great advice. And I think one of the things that I wonder, as when you were sort of managing the information for a particular group, so whether it be dancers or vocalists or theater people, do you encourage counselors to invite expertise from colleges? Like if you knew somebody at Carnegie Mellon and you needed somebody to talk about the specifics of a conservatory sort of type of program, I would encourage you to reach out to this, and they might do a Zoom with your students.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Okay. Again, it goes back to this, and Vince, you and I have both worked on the college side of things. So, it's easy for us to say, but these are just human beings who are, eager to meet students. I mean, I remind my students of that too, sort of this idea that the admission folks actually really want to like you, and they're really accessible to you. So yes, if you're a counselor, absolutely. And the other piece of advice that I would give to artists, and it leads back, I think, to what you were talking about before, the complexity of applying as an artist, is the importance of staying organized. So I am very I am a huge fan of a good old fashioned spreadsheet. I'm sure that I know that there are apps out there that people use, and that's great. I have found nothing better than a homemade spreadsheet to keep track of things. But I think as a counselor, that was one of the continues to be one of the best things that I can help my students with, is how to manage all of the information.
Yeah, I remember we had with musical theater and even film, you'll have different tabs. So the first one is just the regular admission stuff. So you'll have the request for information, the virtual information session, virtual tour, campus visit link, then major link there maybe. And then you create another tab at the bottom, and that's the pre-screen, and then what happens at the audition, that's another tab. So you have you've organized your whole process around the process. And I think that I would say probably 50% of it is going to be organization. Are you following the directions?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. My friend Patricia, who's just a shout out to her, she's the director of recruitment for Tisch at NYU. And she always says, one of your tasks is to follow our instructions. And I think to that end, it's even more important I tell my students, one school a week, just do one school a week and gather all the information into that spreadsheet that you need for that school, because I think that it can be dangerous territory when you assume that one school is the same as another school, because it's not. One school's requirements. And so important to just understand what the deadlines are too. I mean, something as simple as a lot of these deadlines are for arts programs are due, say if the application is due November 1st, the deadline for the arts is also due November 1st. Now that sounds really obvious, right? Except for the fact that you have to upload some of this stuff through the school's portal, and it takes 48 hours to get that portal. I mean, I've had students, I've been on the phone with Chapman on November 1st, and to say, can you send the portal now? Sort of a panic thing, because you really need to be proactive in getting your materials in. also
absolutely.
early. Yeah.
One thing that I thought was that you said that was really great, and this is how you sort of figure out the difference between programs, is first you talked about the audition and the pre-screen process. That tells you a lot about what they're looking for. It's like they're
Totally.
kind of shouting at you. If you don't know how to do something from Shakespeare, maybe this is not going to be your place. Like if you're like,
Absolutely.
I don't want to talk like that or whatever it is. But I think one thing that I found, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts about it, that I've had students do is go through the courses, because
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
if they're not excited about the courses, you're not going to be excited about the school, because those are your options. And look at the faculty members. Is there somebody you see like who's going to take you to another or a different level?
Yes.
And in your own experience, what's the best way to do that? Through the website, you go to the catalog,
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, not all college websites are created equal. So I find myself struggling to navigate some of them, and then some of them are fabulous. I also, for arts programs, yes, look at the courses, go on the websites, but to what I said earlier, reach out to faculty and don't be apologetic about it. Really
right,
be curious, want to learn more. And then what I say to my artists a lot too is, particularly for performing artists, but also for visual artists and film and writers, look at their past shows and repertoire. What have they,
oh yes,
yeah, you can
yeah,
look it up on YouTube. You can, yeah, I'm sure a lot of it is on the school's websites. So you can see if that is what they're performing aligned
right.
with what you want to do,
Oh,
because you can
that's
see,
great.
like, do they do a lot of experimental work, or do they do more kind of golden agey classical stuff? So you can find a lot about that if you just spend some time on the website. And that's why,
Yes.
again, this idea of one school a week, it works pretty well because it allows you to dive deeply.
Now, talking about repertoire or looking at senior projects or portfolios that they post online gives you a sense of their range. I remember looking at the difference. I went to school that is really strong in the performing arts, but it's not audition based. They're really good in theater and the visual arts, and actually very good in film. I went to Oxy, but they're when I was a student there, they were, old school,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you're doing Ibsen and
Yeah.
Shakespeare and
Yeah.
a lot of English playwrights. And then I worked at Pomona, and it was like kabuki and
Yeah. Right.
We Are the World. Like it was really international. They were doing things
Yes.
that were blowing my mind, because I had never seen theater like that at all.
Yes.
So you're right. If you look at that, that will tell you the direction that they're moving towards. If you look at the work they're doing at CalArts, for instance, in theater,
Mm-hmm.
that is experimental. Like
Absolutely. Absolutely. But if you only look at it as, CalArts is a conservatory and so is Juilliard and so is,
yes,
Boston Conservatory, it's like, no, you actually have to do your research. No lists should be identical when I'm working with students in the arts. You should not just choose in the same way that we would never advise students to choose based on, US News and World Report rankings. It's the
yes,
same thing. Do your research, and that's where you're going to be able to find the right fit. And I just have to tell you a quick story that I tell a lot. One of my first years at Walnut Hill, I was working with a really talented fashion designer, and
okay,
she had all of these lines of fashion, and she was unbelievable. And she was constantly doing shows and runways and all of that. And she applied to fashion, schools for fashion, and she got rejected by a pretty major one. I won't say which one it was, but I actually called the office, not to challenge the decision, but just to try to understand, as a counselor, I felt as though I could do that. So I called them and I said, can you give me any feedback on, what I could understand better as a counselor? And the rep said, Well, she didn't follow our instructions. She submitted only final products, and we wanted to see her design, her concepts in action. We wanted to see that she could draw, and she only showed us that she could produce the final product. And that's actually not what we're about at this school. And it was so helpful for me as a counselor. First of all, it was a good lesson for me to do my own research, but to really understand, okay, so that's the type of experience that student would have had. And actually, I think that would not have been a good fit school for that particular student. She went on to have a very successful career in fashion.
Oh, wow. That's a great story.
Yeah.
You know, I worked with a student this past fall who, the scope of her creative work, she was drawing all the time. Like when we were on Zoom, I saw her hand. It was moving the whole time.
Oh my gosh.
She had 8,000. It was massive of like animation pictures. And it was so funny because I think CalArts has a very specific process. You have to film yourself in your book, and you got to give us 30 pages or more.
Yep.
And it was so interesting because she was so prolific. I always thought, oh, she's going to do this part of the process really well. But because she saw CalArts as like, you know, getting into heaven, I think. Like, she procrastinated.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, you can't do that for them.
No, because you got to film, and then the volume, it's like front and back, the whole page has to be filled out. I'm curious as a counselor, and you don't have to name the school, but one thing that I've always said is I want to do a session at NACAC where, I don't know what it's called, but it's something like, why does this process have to be so hard?
Yeah.
Like, do we need 4 essays plus your 5-minute audition tape and 3 extra racks, like all this stuff?
Right.
Friends, this concludes part 2 of Vince's 4-part interview with Sarah Lovely. We hope you join us next week for part 3 of 5. Friends, on Thursday's episode, Andy Strickler continues his 7-parter, or is it an 8-parter, conversation with me about athletic recruiting and college admissions. Lisa joins me for a question from a listener about submitting video in lieu of an interview in your application. Carlin Green, our external outside scholarship expert, has her final part of her interview on how to win external or outside scholarships. And Kevin Newton is back for his series on universities in London for part 3 of 4. Friends, the longer I live, the more my respect grows for Maya Angelou. Maya Angelou was a professor at Wake Forest University. And one of the custom prompts that you answer when you're working on the Wake Forest app is student has to find a quote from Maya Angelou and of their choosing and say why it's important to them. Well, I've been thinking myself about a quote from Maya Angelou and how I can apply it to my own life. And I'm going to challenge you to do it as well. So here's the quote. A lot of wisdom in that woman. I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did. But people will never forget how you made them feel. Did you catch that? I challenge you to think about how this applies to the people in your life. I know I've been thinking about how does this apply to the students I work with, to the parents I work with? How does this apply to the people that work for me? So I want to repeat it one more time. I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. See you on Thursday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joy Stucker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stalianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.